How do you sort out the so-called jargon from real-world practices that work? Do the members of your organization find some business or technology advice utterly confusing? Welcome to Real Talk with Sam Holcman. In this program, we set the record straight, and in terms that business people and technology people can understand. Now, here is your host, Sam Holcman.
Welcome to this edition of Real Talk. I'm Sam Holcman. Thanks for joining me. And today's broadcast is regarding an article that I read recently. It was in CIO, I'll use the phrase magazine online, and it was titled 5 Signs Your Agile Practices Will Lead to Digital Disaster. It got my attention. I do not know the author, and excuse me if I pronounce the person's name incorrectly. First name is, I believe, Isaac, and it's Sacolick, S-A-C-O-L-I-C-K. And once again, I don't know this gentleman. I'm just commenting here on an opinion piece he wrote in CIO magazine. The title got my attention. And then within the article, I'm going to make a comment here that really startled me, and I want to make sure that my audience recognizes I'm not sure that this is what the world of Agile and Agile Manifesto and those people that put that together are saying. I'm just recognizing here an incredibly difficult issue, I think, that needs to be addressed if this article is correct. So what I'm going to do here is just summarize this article, and then I'm going to comment on one specific section. So once again, the title of the article, 5 Signs Your Agile Practices Will Lead to Digital Disaster. That in itself should get people's attention. And the 5 signs, essentially, the first one is the following, and I'm just quoting directly from the article. You fail to build trust and communicate the vision. Number 2, you're retaining waterfall planning but demanding agile delivery. Number 3, your agile principles are too vaguely defined. Number 4, you treat change management and feedback as afterthoughts. And number 5, you're ignoring the culture aspect of Agile or not aligning it with business objectives. Those are the 5 things the author said are signs of your Agile practice leading to disaster. Now, within the article, there was one thing that caught my eye, and that was number 2. You're retaining waterfall planning, but demanding agile delivery. And what this article said, and I'm quoting directly here, is the following. Unfortunately, organizations too often define planning as a pre-agile business activity, an artifact from waterfall project methodologies, where planning helped define requirements, timelines, costs, and other factors before leaders were ready to make investments. Second line quote here, the key is recognizing that planning must be an agile discipline, not a standalone activity performed independently of agile teams. This is what caught my attention, and I believe, to be very direct here to my audience, this is one of the problems. If this is correct, that Agile is contained or contains planning, we've got this all wrong. We look at planning and architecture as way before you think about anything to do with implementation. And I'm going to go back to a philosophy that I have. You architect, you analyze, you design, and you assemble. And for those of you that are into Agile and Agile programming, that is the last step. It's a substitute for what we consider to be contemporary activities, which is not developing or implementing code, but assembling code. But let's get back to the first part. The reason I mention this is in our client base and our experience over the past decades, and I'm going to use this now as a leverage point. You plan and architect way before you bring in the general contractors. In other words, you may not need to Agile anything. You may be able to develop practices that don't even talk about technologies, whether they're Agile or not. So if this is correct, this is a fundamental issue where we believe we can incrementally plan to meet the objectives of the organization rather than recognize that the first thing we need to do is to figure out what the end state is. And as I sometimes say in our webinars and seminars and our training, you can't take 100 log cabins and stack them on top of each other to get a 100-story building. You've got to recognize that the end state is the 100-story building. You can't take 100 copies or 1,000 copies of Quicken, bring them into an organization, and have an integrated financial system. So if this is the case, this is another fundamental issue where we see why Agile and this particular article may be correct, which is these Agile practices, if this is what's happening, will lead to digital disaster because we don't know the end state that we're trying to achieve with these practices. Let's be careful. I hope this helps, and possibly we recognize some of the issues that we're seeing now with the chaos, frankly, that is going on in the implementation speed that is happening today. More and more hacking, more and more bad code, more and more ransomware, more and more things that are happening even though we're developing more and more lines of code. I think we're heading in the wrong direction. So once again, we suggest very strongly that if you want to call it planning or you want to call it architecture, and I know those words are different, we have to do that before we even think about any implementation practices of any kind, waterfall, Agile, or otherwise. Thanks for listening.
Thank you for tuning in to Real Talk. Be sure to join your host, Sam Holcman, again for another edition of our program. We'll have more real topics of discussion then.